With tensions rising between the US and China over the topic of Taiwan's sovereignty, one can only wonder what would happen if China decided to F it and exert military force to take over Taiwan. Now in this video, I would like to briefly explore the plausible consequences of a China invasion, the likelihood of it happening, and what can we do as investors to navigate the markets with such uncertainty floating around our heads. Now without further ado, let's get started. What will happen if China invades? Now if China decided to F it and follow the footsteps of Russia in exerting military action to forcefully take over Taiwan, our investment portfolio is going to go for a skydive, as we will potentially witness a 50 to 80% decline in global equities, with investors rushing for the exit and the fear of an unknown future. Now investors' pessimism will also reach its peak following the daily news of introductions of new sanctions against China, as well as the worsening of economic ties between China and the rest of the world, with the US leading the pack against the China versus the world narrative. Now countries all over the world, especially in Asia, will also amp up their budget to finance additional military spending, which is economically non-productive in nature, while diverting resources and budget from economically productive areas such as education, infrastructure, as well as healthcare. That said, how will all of this action affect the health of the global economy? First and foremost, a global economic depression is more or less guaranteed, as the conflict between China and Taiwan is going to involve the US, which will inevitably involve the countries around the world, given the interconnectivity of the current global economy. Now, businesses around the world will also experience severe disruption as a result of sanctions, worsening trade terms, as well as a disruption in existing trade routes, especially the seas around China and Taiwan, which are some of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. Inevitably, this will affect the earnings of businesses, which will result in higher default rates as well as business failures, especially among those with questionable business models. In a likely event where US intervene, thereby resulting in a war between China and the US GDP is expected to decline by 5%, which is almost double the damage as compared to the Great Recession in 2008, in which we've witnessed a 55% decline in the S&P 500 during that economic downturn. Now China will definitely suffer more, with GDP expected to plunge as much as 25%, as the loss of economic ties will not be limited to just the US alone, but also its allies, thereby leading to a decoupling of China from many international systems, especially those of the West. Long story short, everybody around the world will be affected as the world enters into our next Great Depression. What is the likelihood that China will invade Taiwan? My personal opinion on this matter is that the likelihood of a military invasion is extremely low, especially in the short term. Now the reason for saying this is because, firstly, both China and the US knows that a military invasion between China and Taiwan will involve the rest of the world, and this will result in undesirable economic consequences that nobody wants to deal with at this current stage. As mentioned earlier, today's world is more intertwined than what people would like it to be. It is unlikely that China will exert military pressure just to take over Taiwan as a show of force, while sacrificing the bulk of its economic and social stability by cutting ties with the rest of the world. Now, given that China imports a good number of agricultural products from the rest of the world to feed its population, the risk and the backlash that CCP will have to face in an event where China goes against the social contract of promising stability of the lives of its people are simply too huge to gamble with. Secondly, there is no incentive for China to take over Taiwan militarily unless forced by external parties and circumstances to take action, as a burn and destroyed Taiwan is as good as useless to China as compared to maintaining the current status quo, leveraging on Taiwan's semiconductors capabilities while strengthening its own. Thirdly, there are many ways for China to achieve a peaceful unification without going to war. For example, given that China accounts for 42% of Taiwan's export and 22% of its imports, China can flirt around the idea of import and export bans to exert economic pressure on Taiwan. On the topic of exerting economic pressure, China can also do so by increasing its military exercises around Taiwan Straits, which could essentially block off Taiwan's key harbors, thereby isolating them from the rest of the world. In a less economically damaging way, China can also achieve peaceful unification by having a larger economic presence in Taiwan, and slowly integrating the two countries' practices and cultures via peaceful collaboration and mutual understanding, which will be a long game that China is often used to playing. On a political front, China can also slowly win over other countries diplomatically in recognizing that Taiwan is to be part of China, thereby diminishing Taiwan's sovereignty on the international stage. All things considered, I believe that the CCP might play a long game in terms of its plans for Taiwan's reunification, instead of relying solely on military invasion. That said, if China can stabilize its economy and achieve a significant decoupling from the rest of the world, then the likelihood of them invading Taiwan will increase tremendously, as the consequences of a potential backlash would have been limited. But looking at the facts of the case at hand, I think it is highly unlikely that China will resort to military actions to achieve reunification, unless forced by external circumstances and parties. What can you do as an investor? Now, if you are concerned about the risk of a war, you should stay away from the markets as the whole world will be affected. And instead of investing in equities or bonds, you should focus on investments on commodity asset classes. As in a worst case scenario, what matters are the real resources that can be consumed and not paper assets. We have seen what the recent conflict between Russia and Ukraine had done to global commodity prices. And if China were to start their own military takeover, it will only further exacerbate the situation, thereby driving commodity prices up. Now, all that being said and done, what I would suggest that you do, however, is not to take big bets on the future that may not even materialize. What you should do is to fall back on time-tested principles and invest in a way that ensures that, number one, you do not overpay for your investments relative to its intrinsic value. Number two, you achieve proper diversification across industries, countries, and regions. And number three, you invest in a way that allows you to see through the ups and downs of the market without having to be forced to sell due to your own personal circumstances. As long as you could do that, there is no reason for you to be afraid of temporary drawdown and paper losses in the market. Now, tough times don't last forever, and eventually, the economy and the markets will recover. What is more important is that you focus on the fundamentals of your investments and manage your downside risk, while ensuring that you can see through the ups and downs of the markets instead of trying to time the market and getting worried over external factors that we have no control over. Now, if you do not know how to get started with your investments, or if you do not have the time to manage your investments, you can check out what I do on my website to see how you can benefit from my investment planning services and reach out to me directly. Subscribe to this channel or follow me on Instagram or Telegram to receive a 1-minute daily market update and stay updated with the regular uploads. Stay safe and I hope to hear from you soon.